Within 90 days, they're making six figures. Didn't require them to flip a house, didn't require them to pick up a hammer, didn't even require them to buy an actual property. Welcome to another edition of Confident Real Estate. I'm your host, JC. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to flip contracts, real estate contracts. A lot of you out there are interested in wholesaling. You may have already wholesaled some deals, but some of you out there may not understand the intricacies of how you actually go about preparing the contract that you enter into with the seller so that you could flip it to somebody else for a larger profit. And why you even would want to do that. If you're not into going out there and wholesaling, you actually want to go buy a deal, you still want to give yourself the option to sell it to somebody else at a larger profit based on market conditions, which can change rapidly, or for a variety of other reasons. So in this video, we're going to cover how you flip a contract and why you want to do it, and how to do it for a residential deal and a commercial deal. So stick with me all the way through to the end, and of course, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't joined us yet in Confident Real Estate family, click subscribe. All right, let's get into it. Sometimes you're out there and you're looking to buy a good deal for your own portfolio, but circumstances change. Maybe the co-investor that was going to go in on the deal with you suddenly doesn't want to put his money down on the table. Maybe you've had a change in your life circumstances, your employment situation, whatever the case may be. Even if you're not out there looking to actively wholesale or flip contracts, you might find yourself in a situation where you've already put your money down on a down payment, but you don't want to go through with buying the property because maybe it's a little bit much more than you want to bite off at that moment, or you're in a situation where you no longer qualify for the financing that you were planning to line up to pay for a lot of that portion of the purchase price. So how do you get out of that contract and not lose your down payment? You want to be able to flip it. And the ability to do so is going to be written into the contract when you sign it initially. But it's different whether you're buying a residential property or a commercial property. If you're buying a residential property, chances are there's a state form that's being used. Every state has a residential type of form that they use for residential properties. And in those contracts, it tends to have an anti-flip provision that says you cannot assign the contract to anybody else without the seller consenting to it. So how do you get around that? Easy. You add some language in the rider, especially if you're buying the property in the name of an LLC or some corporate entity. You say, hey, I'm buying it under my name or under this entity name as nominee for an entity to be formed prior to the closing. And that gives you the ability to assign the purchase contract to an entity of your choosing prior to the closing. Now, when it gets to the commercial setting, that's a lot more common that people are buying properties in different entity structures, different LLCs. So it's a lot more common to have that provision where you say, I'm entering into this contract in the name of a holding company, and I'm going to assign it down the road to a special purpose entity that's only asset is going to be this property that I'm buying. 123 Main Street LLC. I'm not going to set that up before I'm in contract. I'll sign the contract under my holding company, Elephant Properties LLC, and then I'm going to assign it to 123 Main Street LLC because I want the protection of this property being in a single purpose entity. If you don't know what all that means, you better click the link below that I'm going to leave for you for my video that I just did on how LLCs work and why you need them if you're doing commercial real estate deals. Anyway, getting back to the matter at hand here. If you need to assign to another entity, you have the ability to choose which entity that is. But if the seller comes back and says in your contract negotiation process, I'm not going to allow you to just assign to some other entity because you're going to go out and flip this contract for a profit. And why should you get that profit? I should make that money. In that case, you go about it by doing the following. Usually in the standard provision that we're talking about, where you have the right to assign the contract to another entity prior to closing, sellers, they're not keen on you just assigning it to a third party. So from the seller's perspective, they want you to assign it to an entity that you're still going to manage and control, right? Because what seller wants to sell you a property for $1 million and then turn around and find out that you went and found somebody to buy it from you for 1.1 million, and now you're going to walk away with $100,000 in profit without ever having purchased the property, and you get to enjoy that extra money. The seller wants to get that money, not you, not let you have it. So what you do is, if your seller is savvy enough and represented by a great real estate attorney who catches what you're trying to do and says, no, you can't just assign it to any entity without our consent. We're gonna require that you get seller's consent before you can assign the contract to some new LLC. Well, in that case, you're gonna say, okay, I don't need your consent if I'm gonna assign it to an LLC where I'm going to be a managing member and an equity participant. And if they agree to that, you have the ability to flip the contract, because you can legally do it by going out there, finding somebody else who wants to buy the property from you. Say that $1 million contract, they want to pay you 1.1 for it because they realize you got a hell of a deal. Well, then you tell them, look at the contract I entered into. I have to have the ability to be a manager and an equity participant in your LLC. But what I'll do is I will sign this side agreement that will be held in escrow pending closing, that says that the minute we close on this property, the very next minute, you can exercise this option to buy me out of the LLC. You buy out my membership interest, I resign as a manager, and you do all that for the sum of $1. So when you close, the seller's happy because they got $1 million, and you closed in the name of an LLC that, under the operating agreement, shows you are a manager and an equity participant, even if you only own 1%. But then you immediately turn around to the person who's paying you that extra $100,000 for it, and you say, okay, here we go. We're closing, you paid me the $100,000, you can release from escrow that agreement that we entered into. And that eventual purchaser who's actually purchasing the property, they're buying it in the name of that LLC that you're a member of and a manager of, but they're turning around and buying out your 1% membership interest for a single dollar, and in turn, you have automatically resigned from any management position in that LLC. And all those documents were pre-signed, but contingent on the eventual purchaser actually coming through with the money and buying the property. Now, the only thing you need to look out for there is if that eventual purchaser doesn't come through, you may be on the hook for buying that property for $1 million. So you need to make sure when you enter into your agreement with the purchaser who's coming through with the 1.1 million that they put up a hefty sum as a down payment, because again, they are getting a great deal here. Maybe you make them put up the 10% deposit or whatever you put down initially, plus that additional $100,000 that you're expecting to collect at the closing. And if they don't go through with the deal, you may have to buy that property for $1 million, but at least you've already gotten your down payment plus $100,000 from the other third party that didn't show up to the closing table. So really, you're not spending $1 million on that property. You're spending significantly less because they've at least covered some of your costs. Just things you need to think about. And of course, always contact and speak with an attorney and have a real estate attorney handle your deal that's specific to the state and area you live in, and somebody knowledgeable to protect you and make sure the contract's drafted up correctly. As always, I really appreciate you watching this video all the way to the end. I hope you got something out of it. I really think you should have gotten something out of it because, believe me, as a real estate attorney, I do a lot of deals, dozens and dozens of deals every single year, big, large commercial deals, and I see these contract flip provisions come into play probably once or twice a year, where somebody either takes on a smaller piece than they initially planned to and sells the majority of the deal to somebody else and they stay in it, or they flip it completely and entirely and get out of it altogether and walk away with a nice 5 and usually 6-figure paycheck for doing absolutely nothing but entering into a contract that they then had the option to flip. Within 90 days, they're making 6 figures. Didn't require them to flip a house, didn't require them to pick up a hammer, didn't even require them to buy an actual property. Important stuff for you to be aware of, so when you structure your next deal, you have all the options available to you to go out and make more money. All right? I appreciate it. Thanks again. As always, smash that like button if you didn't already. Hit subscribe if you're not yet a member. Until next time.